right, episode 3 of the Regs. And this is literally just made maybe like an hour later from episode 2 because episode 2 was pretty short. It was only about a half hour, so and I'm shooting for an hour, so I'm just keeping it breaking up so it's more manageable chunks of information for your think skulls to absorb. So, on this episode of the Regs, we're going to be continuing our discussion of life histories of salmon and as well as other species. But because a lot of the, lake and freshwater ecology and M&A lakes in this state revolve around salmon and the marine nutrients they bring up to the freshwater systems that they influence, we're talking about them the most because regulations, of course, need to be changed around fish and salmon and whatnot the most. Anyways, which is obvious, but anyways, so silver salmon are one of 3 of the salmon species that stay in fresh water for more than 2 years of their life cycle. Chums and pinks only stay in or only have to stay in for about 6 months. But make no mistake, all salmon species can stay in fresh water for their entire lives if they so choose to do so. So silver salmon, contrary to popular belief, only go out to the ocean for 2 years. They literally only 2 years. There are 2 ocean fish. So a lot of people that I've talked to over the years believe they're like 3, 4, and even 5-year ocean fish purely just because of their size. But that just goes to show people, again, don't know what the hell they're talking about. Because Alaskans, because they take a lot of pride in what wildlife they have here, and in the uses they take of these wildlife, they tend to be cocky, overconfident, and think they know everything about them when they really don't. Again, people are not very knowledgeable about such things. But again, that's why you come to listen to this wonderful podcast, because I'm here to tell you and teach you about these species so you can learn to better handle them, manage them, and respect them so that we can keep these resources healthy and the populations up. So, silver salmon don't stray very much, unlike chums or pinks. And as I talk about this, each fish I talk about strays less and less from the previous episode. So pinks stray the most, chums don't stray as much as pinks, and silvers don't stray as much as chums, whereas kings don't stray as much as silvers, and reds barely stray at all. So silvers can only spawn in freshwater systems. They need nice substrate, gravel, sand, and whatnot. They can't spawn in intertidal zones like chums or pinks can. They are strictly freshwater for the first couple years of their life. So they, of course, like the other 2 salmon species we've already talked about, need to absorb a certain amount of thermal units or CTUs before they get to the size, until they develop enough inside the egg to hatch. And once they hatch, they go down into the substrate where they continue to absorb more thermal units and CTUs and develop into fry. And then once they're fry, they rise up out of the substrate, typically during the nighttime to avoid predators, but some still do rise during the day, but those ones usually are picked off by predators. So now that our salmon fry has risen, the dead salmon, its dead parents, have caused a planktonic bloom through its decomposition, and those baby salmon, those baby fry, feed on planktonic animals such as zygotes, copepodic or the copepod family of plankton, and Daphnia, which is a very important planktonic food source for those young fry, especially. So they're munching, eating, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually they get to smolt size, where they start going from eating plankton to more terrestrial food sources like bugs. And depending on where you are, this particular food source could be anywhere from mosquitoes to black gnats to mayflies to stoneflies. Basically, any insect that has a life cycle revolving around fresh water, like even caddisflies, these salmon feed and prey heavily on. And they even prey on other salmon fry. Basically, anything that can fit in its mouth, it will consume as a smolt or smolt sized. So eventually, they'll reach, about halfway to smolt size by the start of. Or sorry, I'm skipping over a part. So anyways, they're eating terrestrial food sources. It's springtime. They're bigger. And so what ends up happening now is salmon start moving up from the ocean. And then this enters into one of their biggest growing periods, where they're feeding on the dead salmon and the salmon eggs that another run of salmon has brought up from the ocean. So they're munching on all that biomass that's coming up. They're growing bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is why this growing season is so, it's just, my point is, it's really good for them over the summer. There's just tons of food. A lot of the predators, say for a few like lake trout, don't or aren't preying as much on the salmon smolt, because they're preying on the dead salmon, the salmon eggs that are coming up the stream, because the return on all of those little salmon eggs, those little balls of fat and energy, is so much better than having to chase down a prey item like a salmon smolt. So it's really good for the entire summer for them. Because there may be more predators around, but those predators aren't necessarily preying on those baby salmon. And this goes for king salmon too, which are they stay in freshwater for the longest, for their early years of their, or early developmental stages of their life, up to 3 years, whereas sockeye only stay around 2, and again, silvers only stay around 2. But anyways, they're getting bigger, they're growing, they're munching, and eventually they reach what is referred to as smolt size, and then they stay another winter eating on just about anything they can find. Again, mostly insects at this point, but still planktonic animals as well. And eventually, in the springtime, just like the chums and the pinks, when snow is melted, water is high, storms are around because the winter is turning into spring, because the temperature changes, they mass up, stage from where they're rearing, which silver salmon can rear just about anywhere in freshwater. They don't have quite as many requirements as, say, a king salmon or a sockeye salmon. So they're staging up from wherever they were rearing. This could be in around the shorelines of lakes, in big rivers, in small creeks and sloughs, just about anywhere they can find that has protection, like tree roots, plants, aquatic plants, grass, big boulders that they'll hide in. Also, this is why having trees around riverbanks and lakes is incredibly important, because trees attract insects when they fall, that the fish feed on, when they fall down into a creek, river, lake, etc. They provide a lot of protection and cover from predators, and their root systems keep the stream banks from eroding very rapidly. So they're incredibly, incredibly important, and this is why we have to be incredibly stringent and strict about what you can do as far as building around or altering stream banks. Because if you do this, you're taking away food sources and protection and habitat away from these salmon smolt. And this goes for, again, mostly silvers and kings because they stay in fresh water, a long time before they move out to the ocean. But it goes for everything from rainbow trout to burbot to whitefish to grayling, steelhead, even large adult salmon trying to seek protection from bears and other predators that might try to get at them, like lynx and otter, everything. My point is, I'm not really a tree hugger, except within about 100 feet of every stream and lake I come across. They're super, super important. So, our smolt-sized fry is now pretty big, maybe about 4 to 5 inches long, and they're roughly about anywhere from 10 to 20 grams as far as weight. So they're pretty big, or they could be pretty small or pretty big, but the point is they're all going out to the ocean at this point. It's springtime, it's nighttime, and about over a 2-week period, they slowly start to trickle out to the ocean. And interesting enough, in the hatchery setting, if you're rearing them in raceways, they'll start to move to the back of raceways because they are naturally trying to go out to the ocean, and the ocean is downstream. So sometimes there can be, not really, I've heard of it, but there can be problems with overcrowding the backs of raceways because all the smolt want to leave, so they have to figure out ways to break them up. But anyways, in the middle of the night, they all move out to the ocean. And all while this is happening, all while they're even staging up, there are tons of predators coming after them. Especially fish like grayling and rainbow trout, but everything from burbot to whitefish to lake trout. Lake trout are one of the bigger predators during this time too, because they don't spawn in the spring like rainbow trout or grayling, or even a few species of whitefish. So all they're focused on is eating and munching. And this is only really a problem with, of course, systems that have lake trout in them, but nevertheless, all of these smolt are getting munched on, even by birds, otters, everything. Everything's eating them because they're all going into the river and streams and choke points where critters can ambush and eat them. So eventually they get out to the ocean or the estuary, where they have a whole nother line of predators to contend with. But also their body starts to go through a change where they develop the cells to exchange salinity from their bodies back into the water, and their immune systems kick into overdrive, and their thyroid gland kicks into overdrive because they start growing a lot more and their body's going through these changes again. So this happens with all salmon, but again, I'm just going over it so you guys know. So now that these fish have moved out into the ocean, they start feeding, getting bigger, eating a lot of crustaceans and planktonic animals. But unlike most other salmon species, these salmon, silvers, prey more on other fishes rather than anything they can just find. And they'll also prey more on squid. And silvers tend to hang out deeper in the water column than a lot of other salmon do because of this fact. Because just like how a great white shark hunts for seals, they want to be under their prey because their prey has a harder time seeing down than it does directly up. So that's how the silvers tend to hunt. And especially like when I'm trolling for silvers, I'm fishing like 90 to 75 feet down in about 100 to 150 feet of water. So pretty deep. Because they're ambush predators, and they're quick and fast, and they use this to their advantage. So they go out to the ocean for roughly 2 years, staying fairly deep, feeding on other pelagic fishes. This could be herring, sand lance, or sand eels, smelt, other baby salmon. It could be baby cod, even, which I've had found a few in their stomachs before. Anything that swims that can fit in their mouth, and even squid too. Just about anything that swims. So eventually, when they come back after 2 years spending in the ocean, which because they spend such a short time in the ocean, their bodies, by the way, because they're able to spend such a short time in the ocean compared to a lot of the other salmon species, and being on average the second biggest of the salmon species, their bodies are just really good at turning food into biomass that helps their bodies grow bigger in such a short amount of time. So eventually when they come back, usually they are the last of the salmon species to return to spawn. They are very particular about where they spawn, almost always favoring either lakes or large streams to spawn in. And once they have spawned, of course, just like all the other salmon, their biomass turns into biomass anyways, where it's decomposed and consumed, and the cycle continues. So because silver salmon have such a short life cycle, they are a fantastic fish in terms of if you need to keep a lot, or you're a subsistence guy. They're just great, okay? Because they have such a short life cycle, they get big. Their meat quality is arguably second or third best in terms of salmon. And they're favored. Their roe isn't highly prized, but it's still absolutely delicious, at least I think. And as far as sport, they are probably the second most popular sport fish, if not the first, honestly, as far as salmon go, because they're prized for their fighting. They're aggressive, mean, and they get big, and they're beautiful. And they're always the fish that gets me back into tying flies. Because my off season is during the time when, you're fishing in the summer. So as far as tying flies, so they're always like, in each salmon run or silver salmon run is different, or salmon run in general is different, where when you're fishing for them, they want different things one year versus the other. Like when I used to fish Bird Creek a lot in Turnagain Arm by Anchorage before it kind of just went downhill. That's another story though. Like first year, they were hitting on flies. Flies were just cracking. Purple and chartreuse SDs, a fly of my own design, were just whacking them left and right. I was limiting out, no problem, no questions asked. And then the next year, they just weren't into flies that much. It was just a different run of fish. And roe was the name of the game. And then the next year after that, it was just all spinners. And then the next year after that, it was kind of a mix of stuff. And then the next year after that is kind of back to flies. But each year is kind of different, but they're still a fabulous, fabulous fish to catch because of their meat quality and their sport fishing quality. They're just great. I can't praise them enough as a fish that needs to be valued more. As far as regulations go, silvers, in populated areas, it just needs to be one. That's really the simple matter. One per person per day. And if you're a subsistence or your subsistence reliant on silvers, I can't really say much because I'm not quite as familiar with the subsistence scene on silver salmon beyond they're just a great food fish because of their meat quality, and then the fact that they have quick returns. They don't stay out in the ocean that long. In the hatchery scene, they are expensive to rear because it takes 2 years of feeding and keeping them oxygenated, well taken care of, treatments for diseases like, when they have outbreaks of like cold water disease or trichodina, for instance. You got to treat them so you don't have large outbreaks of the fish. They are great in a hatchery setting because they don't quite catch as many diseases as kings or sockeye do, but they're still right smack in the middle in terms of which fish catch the most diseases in a hatchery setting. And this is more me being nitpicky, but their poo, like in a raceway, sticks to everything. I don't know what it is. I suspect it's just the way their digestive system sheds maybe mucus out of it, and so it's just sticky. But I'm not entirely sure. But the nice thing about coho is that they're a great divider when all you raise in a hatchery is sockeye, for instance, because they don't catch IHN. So if you have, let's say, 15 raceways, okay, side by side, in every other raceway, you could put coho in it because that's just a further distance that it takes for IHN to jump a raceway into another raceway of sockeye to kill the sockeye, because coho or silvers don't catch it, and they don't carry it either because their immune systems just shed it really well. So coho, however, they don't catch too many viruses. They catch a lot of bacterial diseases, and also protozoa like trichodina or cold water disease, or bacterial cold water disease, which, like I just said, is a bacterial disease. And then the other problem with coho is they have BKD issues, or bacterial kidney disease issues. So at a hatchery during an egg take, every time, like at a big production facility I worked at once, every time we took a female coho, we would have to take like a 5 millimeter by 5 millimeter little cube out of its kidney, 2 of them, one at the front and one at the back, because the way the kidney works is it sheds bacteria, or it has a different bacterial content at the front versus the back. So that's why you have to take one at the front and the back, so you get a better picture when you send it to the pathology lab of what's going on with how much bacterial loads they're taking on. So egg takes can go a little slower or faster depending on how you manage your egg take. If you're at a big production facility, you can kind of go slower with it, but if you take your eggs from a wild stock and you're on the clock, or you have to go remote to get your eggs, it can be a little challenging because you're on a time crunch, especially if you have to get out via aircraft. So, because weather is always a concern and always an issue, at least at most egg takes. So, and then once you get it back to the pathology lab and you have all your eggs divided out in the incubators, you'll eventually get a report that says which fish's eggs need to be culled and gotten rid of to slowly eliminate BKD out of their, out of your stock of fish. It's genetic. It is selective breeding, but it's not any kind of selective breeding that really harms the fish. In fact, it's arguably better for the population or the stock of fish to do this from, and better from for the hatchery if the fish you're taking are meant to come back and spawn at some point, or it doesn't even matter at all as far as genetic alteration goes. If your fish just come back to a big production facility and are just killed off anyways after you get all your brood stock. So it's not of a whole lot of consequence. It's in fact of very little consequence doing this. And if you don't do it, you just have a lot of problems with BKD outbreaks and losing your fish in the hatchery settings. It's a really good thing. So people might argue you're genetically or selectively breeding the fish, but it's not to the fish's detriment long term. It's to the fish's benefit long term doing it this way. So, all right, what else? By the way, I don't script these videos. I'm just talking about this off the top of my head because they just turn out better that way. I talk a lot more fluidly, and of course, this is only the 3rd episode, so I'm still practicing and getting used to doing this. Anyways. So, as far as commercial goes, back to the hatchery setting, and they're awesome because they also have quick returns because they're only a 2 ocean fish. Bam. So they're just great at a hatchery setting, except for the fact that you have to cull and test and eventually cull X amount of fish because of BKD problems. So, on to the next thing. The commercial scene for silvers is unfortunately very poor because the silvers are last in the lineup of returning salmon, by the time they come around, the market is already so saturated with reds and chums and pinks that the price has gone down so low that silvers have little to no commercial value half the time at all, which is really unfortunate because they have one of the best meat qualities of the fish. They're absolutely fantastic. So it's unfortunate, but that's just how it goes. And because they come back so quickly, this is a big reason why I believe that they should be harvested a little more, because it's kind of harder to damage their population through overfishing because they come back. Their life cycle is so short, so it's easier to see them come back quicker if you do overfish them. But again, because of the timing when they spawn, they're just not needed really. One problem I do have with silvers is, like all salmon, but this seems to be an issue with silvers in particular, jacks, or just the tiny juvenile salmon that go out to the ocean but only come back maybe after 6 months at the very least. So fish misidentification, or people just don't care, they tend to keep more jacks than they do the big adult fish without realizing that they still count in the regulations as a coho salmon and still count towards your limit. So I've seen this a lot, especially on the Kenai Peninsula and even in parts of Western Alaska as well. People will keep a whole limit of silvers and then 15 jacks. Now, I am all for having less jacks, but you're still breaking the law because of either disregarding the regulations, or simply not knowing them, which is inexcusable because regulations are free and easy to get a hold of, whether online or having paper copies, which are free, again, or straight up fish misidentification, which is a big problem in the state, actually. So how do you fix that? Well, I advocate for a fishing class or a fish identification and conservation class, kind of like a hunter safety and education class, where you could like pay just $5 for it. You get your card, bada boom, bada bam. It's like a day or 2 day class where you learn about basic conservation, basic how to handle a fish if you plan to catch and release. And that money, instead of going directly to the state, could go directly to funding like stream restoration or better fish research for improved regulations. But considering how it already goes now, I doubt they would put the money towards that. They'd probably put it towards something absolutely stupid, in my opinion. Like, more like monitoring is important, but I do believe we need to monitor more, like not in terms of more of the same places we already do, but more streams, more lakes to to better understand how the fish ecology and behavior works, because I am always a big advocate of drainage by drainage or lake by lake or stream by stream regulation than just general regulations, which again is appalling to me because general regulations are the most stupid thing on the face of the earth. Because having and I'll always go back to this, having a 2 fish limit for lake trout, where in a stream, or sorry, not stream, because lake trout tend to live in lakes. In a lake where there are only like 200 lake trout is dumb, because if you catch 2 lake trout a day, over the course of 100 days in the summer of going back to back on that lake, or X amount of people fishing that lake, you're going to be out of lake trout really quickly. Which is why you need to do, drainage by drainage regulations. Now, again, you cannot, because this state has over 3 million lakes and a comparable amount of streams to match, you cannot do a drainage by drainage or lake by lake, stream by stream, check. You can't check every one, is my point, so because it'd be tedious and time consuming and take a million years to do. You have to do it by more, instead of region, like there's literally only southeast, western Alaska, south central, and northern. Only 5 regions divided in the state and they're divided into subregions after that. But still, you have to do it even more than that. Like, they already have, they keep dividing it more and more and more, but they need to divide it even more is what I'm getting at. And they need to put in the time to go back and recheck all of these drainages and lakes at least every other year, instead of like once a decade. In some places. It's just one of my gripes. But that is for another topic, and I'm sorry to ramble on and on and on. My point is, with silver salmon, it's unfortunate that the commercial scene for them is not more favorable, and that they're not harvested more, despite their fantastic sport fishing qualities, subsistence qualities, and meat qualities. So yeah. And one would say you could actually catch silver salmon in the most amount of ways than you could any other salmon. The only other salmon I would argue with this would be king salmon. But again, that's for another topic altogether. Anyways, thank you for listening to this short episode of the Regs. And stay tuned for the next episode. And I will be trying to figure out how to upload these to Spotify sooner or later, so you guys can enjoy them on the go and listen to them whenever. And soon I will be having some guests on the show. of some predominant fishermen I know in the community who have some contradictory ideas to mine, as well as just different opinions on how things should be run as far as regulations in the state, and even bringing back other species in lake streams or regions that have been dwindling for the past, X amount of years. So thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next episode of the Regs.